So when it comes to animation, I want you to focus on these three aspects first. I want you to master these fundamentals before, making any big dramatic projects or making these long storylines that you want to create. Realism, posing, and easing, once you master these, you will stand out to any beginner animator and automatically become a professional. Dynamic posing, or also known as dynamism, is when a subject is more in a lively position and really emphasizes that pose he's doing instead of being stiff. Let's take a look at these two poses. These two stickmen are punching something. The stick figure on the left looks like he's just pointing at something, right? But the stick figure on the right looks like he's actually punching. He's putting his whole body into it, spreading his legs apart so he can really emphasize that punch. I usually like to have this mindset where I think the stick figure is nearly drunk, so I can produce these fluid movements, and in every frame, the poses are very over exaggerated and it looks realistic. Realistic enough to be comparable to real life. You can clearly see a difference between stiff and realistic dynamic poses. You can find many types of poses and find inspiration through a lot of choreography, such as dance, parkour, or fighting. I also want to talk about over exaggeration. So you see these two figures at the bottom? Their poses are dynamic, but the stick figures on top are over exaggerating that pose. So over exaggeration can be a good thing. It depends on the situation. If you want to showcase like a powerful action or pose, you can go ahead and implement over exaggeration. So we can actually add over exaggeration not only to stick figures but objects. Let's take a look at this bouncing ball. So how can we implement over exaggeration to a ball? We can actually stretch the ball once it falls down to the ground, and when it actually hits the ground, we can flatten the ball so it looks like the ball has a more lighter appearance and the ball looks bouncier. In order to create dynamic poses, we need to use the stretch tool. So if we checkmark the stretch tool, you'll see it gives that 3D effect that we want. So we have more variety in our poses. Let's see how we can implement this into animation. So I want to animate a barrage of punches. That looks like he's swimming. So we're not using the stretch tool, right? So let's use the stretch tool. And now it looks like a barrage of punches. Now we're going to get to easing, which is the most important principle when it comes to animation. Basically, there are other ways you can call it, like ease in, ease out, slow in, slow out. So a subject would start slow, build speed, then end slow at a different pose. It will imitate a lifelike motion, a real life motion, and mastering easing is how you become a professional. It takes a lot of practice. So without easing, you don't get this smooth motion. You get this rigid mechanical motion that you don't want in your animation. Linear movements without easing is acceptable sometimes, such as a bullet coming out from a gun. If we take a look at this person throwing the ball, we see a lot of dynamic posing and anticipation before throwing this ball. There are slight movements added once it settles in a pose, and huge movements once an action occurs. You can tell how well the animator implements realism as they wanted to throw this ball far. They added an extreme wind-up pose and added only 2 frames showcasing during the throw to signify how powerful this throw is. Let's take a look at bad examples. I want to make the stickman throw a punch, however it's not in the suitable dynamic pose. Then we see that barely any easing was added and the figure moved too much, just for a light punch. A good example looks like this. The figure is portraying a dynamic pose in every frame. There are more frames in order to bring easing into the animation, and the stick figure stays relatively in the same position. Just a reminder that physics and logic are mostly applicable to animation. Like, you wouldn't slow out once a stick figure is about to land. You would, however, use slow out once a stick figure lands. I also want you to be mindful of weight, gravity, and reactions. A person holding a heavy object would have to put effort to maneuver and have slower movements. Meanwhile, a person with a lighter object would move more freely and quicker. Here are our key takeaways for lesson 3. We don't have much here. So we have implementing real-life physics and logic in animation, differences between stiff and dynamic poses, and different types of easing. So your action step today is to animate a bouncing ball or a stick figure waving. I cannot stress enough how important this lesson is because it's not only applicable to StickNodes, it's applicable in any animation software.